Have we got it? Is this gonna work? I feel like it might work. I feel like this is the best I can do. My bed is super squeaky, that's not ideal. Like the environment that I do these in. So I'm so hot as well, but I can't take this jumper off because I have nothing on. Got the old Hufflepuff. Fuck, still hot. Oh. So hello and welcome back to another, I'm hoping it's going to be better than last time's video, but to another sort of more informative based video where I fill your mind and my mind with complex issues that I hope to kind of simplify a little bit. So I try. I can't guarantee it, but I try. If you are new to this channel, which I hope some of you are, my name's Charlotte. I'm 25 years old, so like quarter of a century. I can't believe it. 26 is coming soon and I can't talk about it. Here on this channel, I create content that focuses around eating disorders and more specifically anorexia. And what I do is I kind of look into the current research that's out there. I'll do some things on like analysing and discussing studies, but also like sharing my personal experiences and giving you sort of like a realistic interpretation of what recovery is like and things like that. So it's going to be a bit of both, like some are more like serious and more informative. I try. This is supposed to be informative right now and it doesn't seem that formal. So here we talk about like statistics, warning signs, advice for friends and family. I'm really trying to make this sort of like a community that can help both increase the awareness of eating disorders, as well as just sort of like being a place where people feel like they can talk about things and discuss things that they're going through, or ask me if we want to talk about specific topics and things that you've experienced too, because this is what it's sort of all about. So the ultimate dream goal of mine, whether it's realistic or not, but I'm gonna say it is because why not? My ultimate goal is to implement and improve the education of eating disorders, including anorexia, specifically the education of exercise implementation into treatment strategies and things like that, and how we go about that. And implementing this into educational systems, so universities, schools, obviously having some sort of parameter around that, but also the information that's given to GP services so we can help better refer patients and cater more to the requirements of the patient and what's going to work better for them. And so yeah, just the whole treatment process, of how it oh my god, just sort of like just better improving the whole process of treatment through services and also the guidelines of what we're going by. And something that I'll bring up more and more, I guess, as we go along is creating some guidelines in regards to people with eating disorders. Obviously, it's going to differ slightly, most probably, depending on the type of eating disorder that people have. But my experience was with anorexia, or shall I say, sorry, like my main eating disorder was anorexia, and I'll sort of talk about this as we go in terms of like other eating disorders that I've experienced throughout this. So another side note whilst I'm on this topic is that I know you'll probably come to find that I do sort of focus around anorexia, but I do also talk about other eating disorders. So whilst it may seem to not be relatable, things interlink so much, and so don't think that just because I'm talking about anorexia, I don't talk about anorexia all the time. Other eating disorders are included in this, and I think just in general, I think it's really important that you guys do stick around for that sort of thing and see if there's any relatability for you. And also like loved ones and things like, oh, what is my tongue? Because I will be discussing other things that I've experienced, but also it's really important that this is what you guys communicate with me too, if you've experienced any subtypes of eating disorders or anorexia that you feel like should be spoken about. This is the whole point of this, I guess, and making this a community-based thing, is that I'm not always going to have all the answers, and the best way that we can help improve services and things like this is to talk about other things that may come up within eating disorders, if that makes sense. So stick around for the journey, because it's going to be, hopefully it will impact the whole eating disorder community. And I know that is a large spectrum, but it may do some justice, and if anything, maybe it's just a good sense of encouragement, and also for you guys to know what to do if you come across someone with an eating disorder, and how we can approach things and what would be the best methods of doing so. So there's a lot of reasons to stick around, so I hope you guys do. And yeah, obviously I can't speak, but I was gonna say I've gone off on a tangent, but I clearly can't get it out, but I just did, so that's really awkward. Now, if you are new here, and as I said, I mean, pretty much everyone's quite new here because I have not been doing many videos, but you'll come to find that I waffle on a lot, and I can only apologise, and hopefully I can try and shift this as we go and I get better at this YouTube life. So if you want to skip some 40 minutes out of the like 700 that are going to be coming your way, then, you know, do what you got to do. But before you leave the page, do not forget to hit that like and subscribe button, because that's where we got to go with this, and this is the way it's going to support this community and help it grow. There we go, YouTube life going strong. I'm just terrible at it, I really am. I will, you know. Right, I've waffled on for long enough, so let's get into like the main shebang of this video. And I've said before, I have like my laptop below and it's got my script on because I write it all out and then I waffle in my thing. So if I look down, like, I'm very sorry, but it's my notes and that's what I've got to do. My memory, it's not where it's at. So today, I just hit myself in the face. So today's topic, I will be discussing, or beginning to discuss, the brain alterations that are associated to anorexia. And how this influences our behaviours and things like that. Now, I feel like I'm going to create this into sort of like a mini series because I've tried to like segment the portions of the brain and things like that. You'll see as I start talking how complex this disorder is, and this becomes more and more apparent the more we dive into it, and we go through the process of the neuroscience that potentially causes anorexia. So please bear with me, there may be some crossover in regards to like areas and things like that. So today I just sort of wanted to do more like a general overview. I will dive into a couple of studies that I found, but more so this is just drawing attention to, I guess, the surface level of it for now, and then we can dive into it. I've just whacked myself in the face again. We can dive into it as we go along, or things that you may pick up and you will think, oh, I kind of want to know a little bit more about that. Let me know in the comments. So yeah, a lot of parts of the brain when it comes to anorexia, and just generally in the human brain, there's a lot of like overlap and interlink with other segments of the brain. So you may find that I'll be talking about one area and then it links to another. It's my diffuser, I'm sorry about that. But I think as well, even just from me like reading all this stuff, I feel like you will become fascinated as to how much this influences your brain. And I know it sounds really silly and like, well, obviously, but I don't think we realise the impact that it has. And hopefully we can shed some light as to why it's not just as easy as being like, we'll just eat some food. You know, that lovely phrase that we tend to hear most of the time. Not bashing people, because I get people don't understand it. And a lot of us like who have experienced it probably don't understand the concepts or the alterations that are going on in the brain, and there's things that I've looked at and be like, wow, that's like, it's intense. So, you know, it's not ignorance, I think it's just lack of education and understanding. It's kind of like that thing, like when unless you've experienced something, you're never going to really know actually how it impacts someone or what's going on. So, you know, that's what we've got to battle with to some degree. So just putting that out there for now, let's carry on. Again, I'm not like a neurologist or anything like that. This is just based on stuff that I've found and research papers that I've looked into. So if I am off the mark with things, like, I do apologise, but I've tried to like be as right as possible, I guess, and try to do it in a way that's not overbearing, although the science is quite overbearing. And so you may want to just, if I mention some things, you may want to go away and look some things up yourself, or if you mention it in the comments, like I said, I can always sort of like look into this for us and see how we work with that. We're just sort of going to roll with it and then just see how it goes, you know, that's what we do. But the main point of this is that we're increasing that learning of it and making ourselves more aware of what's going on, or what could be going on. I'm just gonna have a sip of coffee because I don't know what I'm talking about. So specifically for this video, I am going to be talking about anorexia and the alterations that are in the brain of an anorexic sufferer. And also what comes up in this is the studies in which I've looked into include recovered anorexics, anorexia sufferer. Why am I talking like I'm from Dorset? I'm just going to keep going and then I'll get to these points when I go. So although the area of anorexia, its predisposition, or its pathophysiology is still very much under-researched, it is growing, and so that's a really, really good thing in that respect. And it has been researched over the last 20 or so years or longer, but solidifying concepts and the mechanisms that influence the development of anorexia are still very sort of unknown, or there's not enough evidence to sort of solidify a true concept or mechanism that influences it. But over that course of that time period, just to give you an idea of the complexity of anorexia, I'm gonna just reel off literally a list of the areas of the brain that have been associated to anorexia, and I'm literally just gonna list you them here because I can't remember lists, so I'm just gonna show you, or tell you, I'm not gonna tell you, I'll show you. So based on my research and based on the fact that I haven't actually done this research for a long period of time, like I've done it for a couple of weeks, but it's obviously not the longevity of my research. It doesn't amount to what could potentially still be out there that I haven't looked at. But from what I found is that brain areas that have been associated to anorexia: cerebral cortex, hypothalamus, cingulate cortex, frontal lobe, temporal lobe, insula, striatum, cerebellum, and then also, like, within those areas, there are areas within those areas that are affected. So yeah, we sort of understanding the reason why it's not just simply as simple as just eat something, because things are going on that we are not aware of. The quantity of studies and the areas that have been explored, there isn't, I guess, enough evidence yet to solidify a commonality or an area that we feel strongly that we can confidently say that that is most definitely affected. And as we go through this, other outliers and other factors kind of interplay with that too, which make it really difficult to sort of solidify that concept as of yet. So I guess two of the main tasks that we have when we're looking into this regarding the neurobiology of anorexia and other eating disorders is, one, solidifying the affected regions and improving the pathophysiological understanding of that, which in turn may help in regards to treatment plans and improving therapy. And two, knowing whether these alterations are actually reversible, and if so, how, and if so, over what time span. How long does it take for these systems to be, let's say, restored? So relatively easy, right? So I wanted to start, I literally just chose this and ran with it, to be honest. I wanted to start with, where is it on my script? So I wanted to start with brain matter, and this can be subdivided into grey matter and white matter. And this is just another way that we can divide up the brain and kind of see what's going on inside. Now, you probably might have sort of heard it a little bit in regards to like brain matter, and it's quite a frequently researched area in anorexia development. So what is grey matter? And what is white matter? Does it matter? Puns everywhere. I can't go. Why did I just wink? So grey matter makes up the outermost layer of the brain, and it plays a significant part in pretty much everyday functional life. It essentially acts as sort of an information processor base, and alongside white matter formulates the central nervous system, with both matters found in the brain and the spinal cord. So grey matter comprises primarily of cell bodies. Now this includes things such as neurons, dendrites, axal terminals, and unmyelinated, I have to say it slowly because I can't, axons. So just to break that down, the axons carry signals between the neuronal cell bodies, and the unmyelinated part means that they're not surrounded or covered by a fatty protein, which is the myelin, which is sort of a whitish colour, and that's what we sort of get onto in regards to white matter. So now we sort of have just like a basic, very, very basic understanding of what grey and white matter are. Please feel free to go away and explore it a little bit more. And if you feel like I've missed something, then please bring it back and be like, Charlotte, what are you doing? You've missed this, and this is like the most important part. So now, having said all of that, what is its relevance to anorexia? Does it matter? There we go again. There's the pun, there it is, it's in there. Now, I don't want to make this video too wordy because it is like an overload of information. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put some definitions for you guys in the description below, because I feel like if I keep giving you this information, it's going to be a lot to sort of take on, and then that way you can sort of refer to it when I'm talking through information, rather than me just rambling at you and be like, this is this, this is that. It gets very confusing, and I don't think it helps anyone. So the definitions that I'll leave are to do with the parietal cortex, precuneus, insula, and thalamus. I think that was it. Yeah, that's not it. I also have the prefrontal cortex and the cingulate cortex and the hippocampus. They will be the definitions for you guys, and I will put them in the description below. Now, the reason why that I specify on these ones is that they've all been in some way associated to alterations that have been recognised in anorexia. Doesn't necessarily mean to say that they are significant. If anything, it may just highlight even more the complexity of the disorder and how much we still have yet to sort of figure out. But just thought it's important for you guys to be aware, because also if you come across any information, or you're reading papers about this, or someone mentions it, or if it's something that comes up when you go see a specialist, you have some sort of idea of what's going on behind. And it's kind of nice to know what is happening in your brain and what's happening in your body. I did look at some studies and also systematic reviews, and they have reported significant reductions in global grey matter and white matter volumes in patients with anorexia compared to healthy individuals. Generally, it's known that acute malnutrition is associated with the reductions in grey matter and white matter that we see, and this can be typically normalised with adequate nutrition and weight restoration in non-chronic patients. So hold on to that point there. So the brain depends on glucose as its main energy source. So I believe it takes around, I think it was 20% of glucose-derived energy, and so it needs a constant supply of this due to the high energy demands of the neurons that are in the brain. So physiological brain function is derived from glucose metabolism, with its main role, or multiple roles, that affect neurotransmission, our ability to learn, our memory function, and our synaptic activity. The main way that we get glucose is through the foods that we consume. Now, this is typically, or most of it of which, is from carbohydrates. So whenever we either stop consuming carbohydrates or we reduce our energy intake for an excessive amount over a prolonged period of time, we'll notice that our blood glucose levels begin to drop and our glycogen stores start to deplete. So when our blood glucose levels drop, this causes the pancreas to stop producing insulin, and this engages our alpha cells within our pancreas to start churning out glucagon. Now, this creates a chain of events which signals to our liver to start breaking down our glycogen stores, to turn this back into glucose, to utilise this for energy in order to create stabilisation in our homeostasis. Now, the brain will eventually start to use other forms of metabolites, so mainly ketones, which are generally found in our fat stores, converting this into energy to utilise to help our body survive, essentially. And eventually this will progress to the muscles, that including the heart. And so if under-eating or restrictive eating is done for a prolonged period of time, gradually and progressively this is going to become more and more critical. So let's just put this very generically into just like an everyday situation. So say that you've just been, whether you're at a desk job, whether you walk about in your job, you're doing whatever, but say you haven't eaten for a prolonged period of time, a good few hours, and you can start to feel the effects of that in regards to like brain function, or feel like you're not focusing properly, and it's almost like that fog-like state, and you just feel super like suddenly this hit of fatigue comes and you're just like, I feel absolutely exhausted, you feel a bit gross, and you're just like, you're not in a great mood either, just not feeling the good vibes. And then as soon as you've either had a drink or if you've consumed some food, you start to feel a little bit better, mood gets uplifted a little bit, and feel like, okay, I can go for another hour, let's go. And that brain fog starts to clear a little bit. And so essentially what's that showing you is both a physical and a psychological response. So essentially the gist is, if we're not adequately and appropriately fueling our bodies and cohesively our brains, then our physical and psychological function is inhibited to a degree. Okay, cool. Just needed to put that in there. There's a little situation. So back to the matter of things. You know, I can't go over myself. So a different review by Shana and Stengel mentions the correlation between brain mass reduction and reductions in BMI. Now this point becomes a little bit more profound regarding its relevance when we start discussing individuals who are in weight gain therapy. Did you understand what I just said? Because I don't know. Who are in weight gain therapy for anorexia and have been classified as weight restored. And this is another concept that I will get onto in regards to like definitions and things like that. So a study by Kaufman explored the association of brain structure restoration to BMI improvements, as well as duration of illness, age, and ed-related cognitions. Now, these were assessed at 3 critical stage points. So this was at the beginning of the assessment, the middle of it, and then nearing the end of the experiment or assessment, whatever we want to call it. Now the time span between time point 1 and time point 3 was around 4 to 6 months. The results from this identified that there was a reduced cortical grey matter in anorexic patients compared to, sorry there's a bit of fluff, compared to healthy controls, with trending reduced global subcortical grey matter and pronounced differences in the hippocampus and thalamus at the beginning of treatment. So over the first and second period, or the phase, sorry, significant global restoration of the cortical thickness was identified in the left and right hemispheres. Now this happened particularly within the first phase, where brain regions increased more so than others. Now what's actually interesting about the results in this particular study is what happens in the final stage. So the degree in cortical thickness restoration was actually associated in phase 3 to age, or correlated with age, shall we say, whereby they actually saw that improvements or further enhancement in cortical thickness was actually more pronounced in younger individuals. Now this relationship appeared to be sustained even after controlling for BMI. Now another study also found that BMI increases of at least 10% in adolescents were associated to an average restitution of cortical thickness of around 0.16 millimeters after a 12-week period. The results from Kaufman's study, however, actually showed that only a 0.12 millimeter increase in adults over a 22-week period was only sustained. So this could potentially mean one of two things. So one being that the brain may not necessarily be able to restore all of its matter volume, or number two, which probably seems a bit more likely, is that the time that it takes for the brain to adequately restore itself is prolonged in adults compared to adolescents. So there's a difference between when full brain matter recovery happens depending on your age. And I think just taking that point is quite significant and probably should be explored a lot more, just in the sense of how that would influence treatment and what would actually be beneficial in regards to time in treatment. Is it that we need to allow for a prolonged period of time for adults to stay in and monitor that condition over a period of time, especially when it comes to weight restoration? And I know I haven't covered this yet, but the psychological hasn't necessarily caught up with the physical, if that makes sense. So whilst you can be weight restored, the mind hasn't recovered to the same degree as what your body physically has. And I know that's a very simplistic view on the situation, but I hope that sort of makes sense of what I'm trying to say in terms of like expanding or having a necessarily prolonged period of time whereby we can see if those improvements have been made in brain function and brain matter restoration. Essentially measuring time of treatment against neurological markers, rather than just looking at physical parameters that we may sort of tend to go off, and assessing it in a more efficient way. Now there is actually already supporting evidence of this in the literature, identifying that longer weight maintenance before discharge being predictive of a longer time period before rehospitalization. So if we can get to the degree of prolonging that, or not being so short after you've been discharged, that time period, it may in a sense help the capacity of people that are in need of hospitalisation, and sort of allow or expand that gap a little bit more to sort of help that process a little bit better. Whilst yes, it's not necessarily the solution, I think it's effective in saying, okay, well, is it more beneficial to extend someone's time whilst they're in there now and essentially prolong the after effect, which will hopefully give more of a chance of not relapsing, or do we just keep them for an allocated slot and then that be the end of it, even though they're not necessarily psychologically ready to be discharged? I hope that makes sense. Now, I did actually find a paper by Kaplan in 2009 who did investigate this point, and they also identified that patients that entered at a higher BMI level had actually a lower rate of weight loss within the first month of an outpatient treatment program. So that could indicate that long-term weight maintenance may be essential for the success or for the biological processing that sort of perpetuates anorexia to be reversed. But it also addresses the fact that long-term starvation on brain processes may not be reversible with acute refeeding. It may be that it takes a lot longer time for this to be restored efficiently and effectively. So now we run into the factors of time and age significance in grey and white matter restoration in anorexia and the brain alterations that come with that. So although a majority of the findings that we currently have in the research have been reported in adult participants, there has been consistent acknowledgement to the discrepancies between adolescents and adults, but the exact underlying mechanism again and processes are yet to be solidified. Now, observed differences do tend to point to the ongoing brain development during adolescence, encompassing higher grey matter plasticity, as well as other contributing factors such as fluid shifting from intracellular to extracellular space as a result of modified osmotic pressure or dehydration, as well as hormone alterations such as decreased leptin levels. So leptin essentially is to do with our long-term energy expenditure, and altering food intake and our response to that. Thyroid and gonadal hormone alterations, as well as influxes in our cortisol levels. So cortisol is our main stress hormone that has many particular processes throughout the body, these including things such to do with metabolism as well as our immune response. Now, generally in anorexia, there tends to be this fear or this avoidance of foods that are high in fat or contain fat in itself. Now, although fatty acids can be produced endogenously, it may be that the polyunsaturated fatty acids, the essential fatty acids that we obtain through nutritional intake, may be fundamental in the function of fluidity of membranes and the bounding of enzymes and ion channels, making potential sense of the fluid shifts that we see and the cell death and apoptosis that occurs. But again, this is still a very underdeveloped area of research, and so we need more sustenance behind that, or substance behind that, to solidify that concept in an anorexic population. It does, however, seem to be a growing theory though, however, that alterations in cortical thickness being a result of astrocyte and glia cells or glia cell proliferation, and respectively, longitudinal studies seem to show that the normalization of white matter is more attainable than grey matter, with persistent findings of grey matter being still impaired or reduced even with restoration or in recovery. Now, primarily, neuroimaging studies have been more focused on grey matter as opposed to white matter. So therefore, we can't just rule out the fact that there are no kind of alterations or associations with white matter that influence the development of anorexia. And keeping in mind, in fact, as well, that anorexia is a mental health condition, myelin changes have actually been linked to a number of other psychiatric conditions, some of which are experienced intertwined or experienced alongside anorexia and anorexia patients. So this includes things such as depression and OCD. So it can't be conclusive that white matter has no association to the development of anorexia, and it being of less importance. So just clarifying that fact. Studies have actually investigated into people who are in remission from anorexia and have also highlighted the potential longevity of matter restoration, indicating that it could take years for cerebral tissue normalization to occur. And in a particular study that I looked at, the, I guess, duration of their recovery had been about 4 years. So whilst it's not necessarily saying it's going to take that long time, it just states that it could. And so I think that's a really important concept to sort of get to grips with, I guess, in terms of the damage that can be caused and how long it takes. It's almost like it takes longer to repair something than it does to formulate it, if that makes sense, I guess. But the sort of controversy sort of still continues within this grey matter and white matter scenario in regards to its association to anorexia, because others have failed to determine any alterations in recovered anorexic patients, including characteristics of illness duration, anorexia onset, and lowest lifetime weight. So it's incredibly important to sort of note, and I think this has to be one of my favourite lines that's come from like a study. I think I've pretty much reiterated this as I've gone through anyway, but it's that absence of evidence does not constitute evidence of absence. So therefore, failure to detect any differences in grey matter or white matter alterations doesn't necessarily mean that there is none. And this is something that we need to sort of be so careful of when we're interpreting and analysing studies and results and the information that we're giving out, being aware of heterogeneity within studies and how important that is. Evidently, my waffling is just still a thing. So I've had to split this video up into 2 parts. So for part 2, please click on my next video, can't even talk, where you can hear me waffle on for a little bit longer.